to start is on randomized control trials. And so let me just talk you through what I have in mind for today. In the first lecture. Question is obviously like just to get our basics right, like why do we need to randomize? What's the advantage of doing that? And then if you're convinced after this that there is some merit of doing randomized control trials, then I think one question would be, how do you do it, right? So how do we randomize? What are the different methods in which we could randomize this? What are some of the common issues that one can face in terms of the implementation of the RCT? And then if we have time in the end, I can talk about some of the research that I've been doing and, talk through the project that we worked on, just to give you like a practical flavor of how this goes in the field. So randomized control trials. So let's jump straight into it. So just give you a brief background about what RCTs have been until now and how they've evolved, so on and so forth. So I think the importance why we have an entire session on randomized control trials or RCTs is because they are widely recognized as an important policy tool, especially in the last 10 years or so. They have really gained prominence both in economic research as well as in economic policy. So it started mostly getting importance in the mid 1990s with some. Great. So since 2000, I think the expansion of RCTs has been very, very rapid. And so you have organizations like JPAL and IPA. So JPAL has a huge office in South Asia. If some people might have heard about this, others who haven't can Google JPAL. And I think it really got a lot of prominence last year. So if you've been following the news in 2019, basically Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kramer won the Nobel Prize in Economics for their work developing the RCT framework and bringing it, really bridging the gap between research and policy. So it's, I think, important whether you're a student, whether you are a professor, or whether you're a policymaker, whether you're in the government, to understand the merits and demerits. We'll discuss both. I don't want to glorify RCTs as the thing that you always want to do, but it's important for one to understand where it can be useful and where it cannot be useful. Understanding both things would be nice, right? So this is basically just one graph. I should have probably update this graph, but just looking at the number of peer-reviewed publications coming through RCTs and the growth of that over time. So what you can obviously see is after 2000, there is this like massive increase in publications of RCTs. Similarly, this is the growing number of research affiliates in some of the economic research programs. This is predominantly in the US, but what you can see is, that's also growing with the number of people in economic research doing RCT. So it's almost 60% now in this thing, in BRED.
Excuse me, sir.
And then, sorry, BRED is the Bureau of Economic Research in Development. So this is like one of the premier economic research groups in the US on doing development economics. And so this is basically showing you the fraction of people in BRED who have at least one RCT. And so what you can see is between 2006 and today, that's almost close to 70% of researchers who have done at least one RCT. This is just to say that it is, it's just getting more and more popular. So it becomes important for us to understand why one wants to do it. And so this picture is basically showing you in how many countries and sectors JPAL is doing RCTs. So JPAL is the research unit that is started initially by Professor Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo. And so it has, as you can see, it operates in a lot of countries, including, of course, you can see this blob in India where, there's lots and lots and lots of RCTs happening in India, but also you see it spread out across the world, including developed and developing countries. So you have the US and the Europes of the world, but you also have the Africas and the South Americas and the South Asias of the world, where people are trying to use the tool to understand research and policy. And it's spread across sectors, so it ranges from, agriculture, finance, microfinance to education, environment, political economy, and governance. So it's spread across sectors as well, to answer these questions, right? So true to my MBA teaching roots, I will start with a case study. So just to get us, comfortable with some of the terminologies and stuff. So I feel let's just get into the practicality of it instead of making this a theoretical case. So what I'm going to do right now is to talk about a small case, which is called the READ India evaluations. And so as we go through the case, it will force us to think about, how we want, or what are the drawbacks of other evaluation techniques. So basically why RCTs are useful is because it's an evaluation technique, right? So for example, as we will see here, I'm just going to share another screen. Okay, so can someone summarize what's happening here? What did you understand after reading this? What is the case about? Anyone?
So, I mean, my
Vishnu here.
Yes, Vishnu. Can you guys raise hands in the chat box or in this thing, just so that I can call on people and avoid this double conflict?
Yeah.
But anyway,
So,
Vishnu, go on.
Yeah. So I think this has 3 parts to it, the document. The first part is it shows that very low percentage of children in rural Uttar Pradesh could read and understand a simple story and even recognize a letter. The second part was Pratham developing their Learn to Read module, which tries to get thousands of volunteers to teach basic literacy skills to millions of children. And the second point also talks about how they went about doing it and also a monitoring mechanism. The third point is trying to evaluate the Learn to Read module, and they have 3 ways of doing it. I think it's a logit function or whatever, if you put it in revision. So it's like they're trying to do a before and after, and they have assigned values for the before and after in the document. I think that's a brief summary of it.
Okay. Yes, Patraji.
Yeah, good morning. Basically, it's a intervention program designed for a select target, and thereby you are creating a group which is different from maybe another group where intervention is there, maybe other group intervention is not there. Therefore, then you could perhaps make an assessment how this intervention is working or how it is progressing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Alokji, you want to say something?
No, I think everything has been covered.
Okay. Yes, Amit.
There was no mention of base. There was no mention of baseline, because they must mention that the baseline was done in 2004. Then after that intervention they can, because neither they have told that there is a control group or what. So it's implicitly assuming that they have done the baseline survey first.
So you have said a lot of words
that
so you have just used 3 or 4 words that I have no idea. So what is a baseline survey, Amit?
I think this maybe before intervention a survey done, or 39% or 15% values considered as a baseline.
Okay, so baseline is a survey that you do before the intervention begins, right? Right now there is, so good. So let's summarize and put a structure on this, right? So there are three parts to this. One part is there is a problem, right? There is a policy relevant problem, which is that most kids who are 7 to 14 years old can't read. Like 15% of them can't even recognize a letter, right? And if you're 14 years old, you're almost in class 8 by then. So the fact that they can't recognize the letter is worrisome if you're concerned about education first, right? Second, Pratham is an organization that, I mean, Pratham anyways is doing great work in education, but specifically with this project, the policy solution to this that Pratham has come up with are these grassroots volunteers, right? So the Read India campaign, basically, right? So you have a bunch of volunteers who can go and conduct these after school classes, and they can help students learn and bring them up to grade level, essentially, right? And so then the question is 2 things, right? So we have a problem, we have a solution, we have to do 2 things. One, does this solution work, right? So that's, as a researcher, as a policymaker, that's what you care about. I have a solution. Is that actually going to work? That's what we call an evaluation, right? So we are evaluating a certain policy. In this case, the Read India campaign. Okay. And so if you want to evaluate this, what do we care about? At least in this case, what we care about is improving reading levels. We want students who are doing very, very bad on reading to potentially, after 1 year of the Read India program, we want to see if their learning levels have improved, which means there is a measurement component of this, right? I need to measure reading level in some sense, right? And so that's the last part here in terms of like, how do you actually measure this? So for example, one thing that Pratham does is essentially they conduct the ASAR surveys. So if people have worked in education before, they've probably heard about the ASAR surveys. And the ASAR surveys, all that it does is, you put a bunch of sheets in front of children and you ask them to, read whether they can recognize letters, whether they can recognize words, whether they can recognize sentences, whether they can read paragraphs. And so that's increasing level of difficulty. You're basically improving and seeing where is the break in their learning levels, right? So there is a problem, there is a solution. What we are interested in is in asking, if I implement this solution, is that going to improve reading levels? And so I need to measure reading levels, and this is the measurement tool. Okay, so far with me. So I haven't talked anything about baselines. We are not talking about RCTs, control groups, nothing right now, right? We're just simply building the case for now. Okay, so if you're with me until now, so then let's move on to the second part of this case. Can you see the new screen? So let's look at one way of evaluating this, right? So now what I'm going to give you is I'm going to give you a bunch of ways in which you as a policymaker could decide to evaluate this, okay? And then let's see what your thoughts are on whether this is actually a good way to measure the impact of the program. So what I'm interested in is did this Read India program actually have an impact on reading levels? That's what I'm interested in. Okay, so I'll just give you a minute to read this piece. What are they doing here? How are you measuring the impact of the program? Or how is Pratham measuring the impact of their program?
Yeah, excuse me, sir.
Yes, Azim.
Hello. Yeah, yes. So, sir, they are evaluating the effectiveness of this Pratham program, and in
How?
the previous slide you have shown that the level of their reading skill has increased. So there is a comparison between the baseline and endline categories, and as we have seen in this part, so those who were not able to read even a single word, their proportion has gone down. Similarly to other group which in which childs who were not able to read a letter, their proportion has also increased. Sorry, the proportion of those students has increased who can now recognize a letter, and same thing happened to other groups. This is what I found.
Great. So Azim, what is the baseline and endline?
So baseline is the category before the implementation of the program, means before the conduction of Pratham.
And endline?
This is after the implementation of this program.
Wonderful. That's absolutely right? So basically, as you can see, if you just take this graph, right? So you had basically at baseline, as you can see, lots of people were on 0, right? They couldn't recognize read or even a simple letter,
Yeah.
right? In this distribution, right? And then what you can see is that at endline, this 0 basically goes down, right? These guys at the endline, many of them can now recognize letters after 1 year. So baseline is what we call a survey that's done before an intervention. Then you have 1 year of Read India, right? And then you measure the same children after 1 year. So they start in class 7, for example, and then at the end of class 7, you again measure their reading levels. So one thing you can see is that, many of these guys have transited from reading nothing to reading letters by the end line, right? Similarly, yes. Who is this? Sumantra. Yes.
What happened to the rest of the students, like those who participated?
So rest of whom?
Rest of the students who still cannot read well.
Right. So these are these guys here, right? So you have some people, you have some students who started here, and then after 1 year they still couldn't read. Right?
Yeah, I mean, what is the explanation for that? Like, if the program is effective for some and program is not effective for others, right?
You tell me, what do you learn from this?
I mean, either we assume they're like morons, like they cannot be improved, and nothing can be, the program cannot be, any kind of program cannot be helpful for them, and some of them they grasp it and then they try to improve and then.
Exactly. So yeah, so you have absolutely. So I think some people, so what we care about when I say the impact of the program is on average that a person learn from this program, right? So there will be some people who will not improve reading levels. There will be a lot of people who will. So the average impact is basically what I'm interested in. Now, why, I don't exactly know the details on why is it that some children did not learn, some children did, but that's a good question. I would push you to go back to the paper to read this. Yes, Meghaji.
Sir, I just want to know, the sample is same in the baseline and endline? Like, is it a panel sample or
Yeah.
Or a random sample of the
No,
population?
panel sample.
Okay, thank you.
Same children, yeah. And so similarly, as you can see, some children who started off in the baseline with a letter, right? So they could recognize a letter at baseline. You can see that some of them improved to recognizing words, paragraphs, and stories. Some of them remained at letters, right? So, but what are we doing essentially? Who are we comparing? You are comparing children who went for the Pratham classes, right? Before the program and after the program. You're seeing the change in the reading levels of the children who went to the Pratham classes, right? So I'm going to introduce a new term here, which is basically, children had they not got the program. We know what happened when they got the program, right? Because we see that half these children who could not recognize letters are now being able to recognize letters, so on and so forth, right? But the counterfactual in a way is what does the world look like had these children not got the program? So in this case, what is the counterfactual? Does anyone want to build on what Abhinash put out? So in our case right now, what is the counterfactual?
Hello, this is Shobit.
Hi, Shobit.
There is no counterfactual in this. That is the main problem with this. Like, they haven't put a control group in there. If there has been a control group, this study must have been much more good and more towards policy perspective and all. Yeah.
Excellent. So Shobit says there should have been a control group. Why, Shobit?
Because
what is the problem if it doesn't have? So you're answering question number 3 now. What is the problem with this evaluation?
Yeah, there is no control group because without a control group, I don't think RCT works as good as it should be. Like, control group is much.
We haven't got to RCTs yet. So I'm just asking you, in this evaluation, what is the problem? You're telling me there is a better evaluation. I agree.
Yeah.
But what is the problem with this evaluation?
Like, you can't compare between two groups. You are only seeing there is a group and you just saw it before the implementation and you just saw it after the implementation.
So what is the problem? And I'm telling you that group improved. There were kids who couldn't read. I made them access the program. Now they can read. So isn't that good?
Sir, may I?
Yes, Saptarshi.
Yeah. Sir, without the program.
Please call me Gaurav. Yes, sir. I mean, I'm not that old or wise either. So please call me Gaurav.
So without the program, also on a natural way, in a year, the children could have learned to read the words or letters. So that natural increase, I mean, with the regular education program which they were receiving, that increase we don't know here.
Excellent. Right? So Saptarshi's point is basically I am comparing one child who starts class 7, I'm taking reading levels and I measure that same child 1 year later and I see that child has improved. And what this program is, or this intervention or this evaluation is doing is it's saying that improvement is because of the program. It's causally attributing that change in reading levels to the Read India program. And what Saptarshi is coming and saying is that, look, if you spend 1 year in school, irrespective of whether you had the Read India program or not, the child must have learned something, right? So essentially what you're I think what Saptarshi is saying, and Saptarshi, correct me if I'm wrong, is Saptarshi is saying that, look, some of this improvement that you see between these 2 years could have been the Read India, but it just could have been children attending school, right? And we are not able to distinguish, these two efforts, right?
Yes.
So there is something that we need to know if we want to causally identify the impact purely of the Read India program. And that is, I think, what Shobit also had in mind when he talks about a control group and trying to talk about, counterfactuals, right? Okay, good. So everyone on board so far. So we have identified at least one problem with this program. Any questions? Yeah.
May I?
Please, Amit.
So, like, bringing exact one-to-one match or a parallel assumptions, basically like a household control variables and others we have not incorporated, adding to the Saptarshi. So there may be n number of variables which are affecting the learning outcomes. So isolating the program impact basically does not, in this they have not controlling the household variable, individual variable where they are staying. So there are so many factors. If they control that would be basically improve the precision.
Excellent. Absolutely.
Hello.
So now let me, yes.
Hello.
Sorry.
May I?
No, Balakrishna, Abhishek, one of you.
Balakrishna here.
Okay, Balakrishna.
Sir, coming to the point of the Saptarshi, what he has mentioned. So here I can say, like, if the curriculum has been different, in that case, let's say that if the curriculum is same and you are telling that some improvement has occurred, let's say the curriculum is better than the existing, so this Read India program, that may lead to some improvement here.
Correct. I agree. So you're saying the same thing, right? You're saying that this is not necessarily Read India, which is why children are improving, right? Okay, let me give you another example. So there was, sorry, let me try and zoom this a little bit and see if I can zoom in. Can you see the new screen? Okay, who can venture into first explaining the graph to everyone? What is this graph?
Hello.
This is
Shashi.
Shashi here.
Yeah, Shashi.
The graph is trying to point out evaluation done by Education for All team, trying to check where the reading ability of the students who had taken this Pratham Read for All Learn to Read thing, and those who had not taken the program, and it shows that the mean reading level of students who did not take those classes actually fared better on average vis-a-vis the students who actually took the program.
Excellent. Is everyone on board? Any questions for Shashi? Okay, good. So what are you doing? You're basically, this graph is telling you that they went at the end of the school year, right? So suppose you have class 7 beginning and class 7 end. So they go to the end line essentially, and they look at, so the case number 1, what we did in the last method was looking at the same child in the baseline and end line, right? That's what we did previously. Now what they're saying is that these guys went to not baseline end line, but they're looking at the end line, but they're looking at participants and non-participants. Children who participated in the program and children who did not participate in the program. With me? And what they're basically showing you is that for the kids who did not participate in the program actually had higher learning levels, right, than the children who participated in the program. So what their claim essentially is that if you actually did not participate in the program, at the end of class 7, you actually had better learning. Your reading scores were higher than if you participated in the program. With me? If you are Pratham,
I got a question here.
Sorry, Azim. Yes.
Yes. So I have a question. So was the participation in this program voluntary for the children or not? So if
it was voluntary.
It was voluntary, then I see a problem in it.
Excellent. As you should.
It is possible that yes, sir. It is possible that those who have not participated, they were pretty good in terms of their reading skill at the first level, and that is why we see this kind of difference in their reading skill. Means even after the implementation of program, the student who participated in this program, they would have improved, but relatively they are still lower than the group which has not participated. So I see a problem in it. So I think it is a problem of randomization.
Exactly. It's not randomized yet, but yes. So Azim's point is basically that, the reason I'm going for Read India to begin with is because I can't read, right? If I can read, I wouldn't be going for the program to begin with, right? And so this is not surprising to Azim. Any other thoughts?
So there should be one more graph that the position before this program.
Excellent.
The orange one, whether the level was same, average level was same, whether it has improved or not. It may be same 1 year before also.
I think, hello.
Have improved
yes.
for the children who participated in the program. So if
I think we should
previous year data, then how we can say it is better, it is not better.
Perfect. Anyone else?
Yes,
I heard someone else.
We should focus on the marginal change over a year, like what was they have before introducing the program and after, and compare them with the people who are not introduced to the program, and compare the change of these two groups.
Excellent. So on your screen, can you see method 3 now?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you guys take a minute to read method 3? So, in line with what Azim and Seema were saying, Azim and Seema, what do you think about this? Is that what you wanted?
Yes, sir. Yeah, they should have shown the baseline difference in this in the reading ability of the student before conducting the program, before criticizing the Pratham. This is what I see.
So, can someone explain what is happening here? What is this evaluation method doing? Someone else. Someone who hasn't spoken until now. I can wait all day. But I want you guys to.
Hi.
Yes,
Swati. Swati this side.
Yes, Swati.
In this, we are just comparing the endline and minor, the change in the reading level during that 1 year, or during the activity of Pratham.
Change.
So endline minus baseline for 2 sets of kids, one who went to the Pratham classes and the other one who did not go to the Pratham classes.
And is that an improvement over the previous methods or no?
It is an improvement over the previous method.
Why?
In the method 2, we were just comparing the endline survey. We were just doing the endline levels.
Excellent.
So in this, we are taking into account of this self-selection bias.
Excellent. Right? Excellent. Anyone else who wants to add to this? Can someone repeat what Swati was saying? She makes an important point, but I would just want to make sure everyone's on board with the point that Swati just made. Anyone else?
Hi,
wants to repeat?
here.
Yeah, Bhavish.
So I see a problem of matching issues here, matching of this control group as well as your treatment group.
Okay. What is the issue in matching?
So you are not evaluating the proper group of children.
Okay.
So the problem with the matching, because you are in one hand you are recruiting the children who are unable to read and something like that.
Okay.
So that proper matching is not happening. That's why you are getting different results.
Okay. So let me rephrase it. What is the control group and treatment group for this evaluation? First of all, is there a randomization so far? Have we talked about randomization?
No.
No, right? There is no experiment so far, right?
Yeah.
We're just comparing two
Yes.
groups of people. As Swati said, we're just comparing 2 groups of people. So what is the control group and what is the treatment group?
Treatment group is a Pratham students who attended the program and those who have not attended the control group.
Exactly, right? And that's the definition we will use even when we talk about randomizations. So whenever in a randomized control trial, you hear of a control group and a treatment group, a control group are those set of people who do not get whatever intervention or whatever program that is being tested out or evaluated. And the treatment group are people who get that program. Okay. In this case also, you have people who participated in the Pratham program, who we are going to call the treatment group. And then people who did not participate in the program, who we're going to call the control group, right? Right now, there is no randomization. We are purely comparing 2 groups of people before and after the program. Okay, so we're comparing the change in their levels, as Swati said, for two groups of people, one who participated and one who did not participate, right? Right? And so what do we find? What does this evaluation find? Can someone tell me what this evaluation finds?
That the impact of Pratham programs has really impacted the children, those who have taken the classes. And
where
the
can you
children
see that?
That the learning outcomes of those children has increased to 0.6 level in comparison of 0.3.
Exactly, right? So children who took the Pratham course, their learning outcomes improved twice as much as compared to children who did not take the program. Okay, good. So now, what is the problem with this?
The problem, the biggest problem is this, that Pratham has taken the children who are good, who are already know how to read, and they have not done the selection of those children who doesn't read, who doesn't know how to read primarily also. Like, they have not taken any selection in taking the students.
Okay.
They have just taken the students in any like those who have already have a good level of reading understanding.
Gurvinder, do you agree? I saw you nodding your head vigorously.
I have a question.
Okay, Priyanti.
Okay, so basically I have a question regarding this control group thing. So like, if someone doesn't opt, like voluntarily opts not to go for this Pratham program, are they the control groups, or those who do not get the opportunity to to get enrolled in this course, they are the control groups?
Who can answer that? Who wants to help Priyanti out? What is the control group here?
I mean, one cannot control that they got the opportunity or not. They just simply have taken those kids who have not attended the program. So it's, I mean.
Yes, it doesn't include any selection bias.
Right. So Priyanti, yes, the control group here are students who did not take the program. It was selected, it wasn't randomized, but that's our control group. Gurvinder, on what Anjali said, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the point she was trying to make is that people, the kids who were selected were the ones who could read, and the ones who were left out were the ones who were unable to read. But I think it's the other way.
It is the other way around. So, but still, what is the problem with this evaluation? If I come and tell you now that I have done, this is basically what we call a difference in differences. Right? From an econometric standpoint, this is called a difference in differences. What are you doing? You're taking a difference in your control group over time. You're taking in the difference of the treatment group over time, right? And you're taking a difference of that difference, right? So you have a 0.6, which is the reading improvement in the treatment group. You have a 0.3, which is the reading improvement in the control group. And so your conclusion is that Pratham has a 2 times as high reading level increase as opposed to the control group. Okay, what is the problem with this?
The baseline, the two groups should be similar, and if you take their effects, they should come as parallel, and like they should be similar in other aspects.
Okay. Okay.
So I think.
Excellent. So let me summarize our discussion so far, right? So in a simple graph, okay, so just to make ideas clear, and then we'll move on to RCTs, because I think everyone is now on board in understanding these problems, but just to make sure that's true, right? So suppose let's take a very simple, so this is the same case, but I'm just like making the graph simpler just to make sure the point is clear, right? So suppose like what I have on the x-axis are the 2 rounds, right? So you have the baseline. So you have the baseline and then you have an end line. Okay. And then on the y-axis, what I'm plotting is the average score. This is a graph, right? This is not actual data, but it's just to make sure the idea is clear. Now, what I find, for example, is say in the baseline, you have the participants have some reading score. Okay. That's the average reading score of the children who took the Read India program. Okay. And at the baseline, the average reading score, this is of the non-participants. This is what we found, right? This was like one of the things. Okay. Now let's say that I measure the same kids again in the end line, right? And what you see is that the participants have grown by something. So like the participants have grown by this amount. And you see that the non-participants have also grown by this amount. Clear so far? This is just giving you a simple example to make the point clear. Okay. So then what do we have, right? This is what we call is what all of you are calling a selection effect, right? Which means what? If I look at the baseline, if I look at the difference between the reading scores of the children who attended the program, which is here, and children who did not attend the program at baseline, this is before anything happens, right? This is what I'm going to call a selection effect. Let's say that's lambda. So suppose the reading score of the baseline is 0 for the kids who attended Pratham. For the kids who did not attend Pratham, the score is say what, like 3 or something, right? So that lambda, which is the difference, is what we are going to call the selection effect. Okay. What is the other thing that's happening? Which is what people brought out at the earlier point, right? What was the other thing that was happening? It's that over time, just by being in school, you're learning something, right? Just by being in school, everyone is learning something. Okay. So this is what I'm going to call the delta effect. Delta is just how much are kids learning over time. Okay. So what I have here is that suppose like, so between the baseline and the end line, as you can see, delta is giving you the effect or what I'm going to call the change over time. Okay. With me so far? And so therefore, as you can see, for the treatment group, which are these guys, right? Some part of this change is accounted for by just a time trend, which is delta, right? And some part is accounted by the extra effect is coming from the program, right? The fact that they've got the program, whereas in the control group, they did not get any program. With me so far? Right? So you can see the problem, which is exactly what everyone has brought out in this discussion. I'm just putting it in a more constructive way so that these ideas are clear. But this is precisely what everyone was talking about, right? What we are interested in is this treatment, is this capital T, because that's the true impact of the program. That's what we are after, right? That's what we are after. Okay? Good. So if you have this, then the very first evaluation method that I showed you was comparing what? That was comparing the children who attended Pratham before and after, right? So that was basically the first news piece that I showed you was comparing, saying, look, like children who attended Pratham, right? Their learning levels improved. That is what the first piece was showing you. Now with this drawing, what you can see is what is that going to conflate? What is your treatment effect going to be there, right? So what is the measured treatment effect? The measured treatment effect is this. Delta plus T is what you're measuring. Because you're comparing the average change for a child who attended the program before and after. So before he was at 0, after he is at T plus delta. So what you're going to attribute to the Read India program is T plus delta, as opposed to just T. And this is exactly what I think Azim, if I'm not wrong, had brought about earlier, saying that, look, this might just be that over time people are improving their learning outcomes. But that's not true, right? It's the program plus the fact that people are just improving their learning outcomes. With me so far? Yeah? Now let's look at the second news piece that we had. What was the second news piece? The second news piece was comparing the kids at end line. So it was saying, let's compare children at end line. But now let's compare children who participated versus did not participate. Right? Children who participated but did not participate. So in this case, what is the measured treatment effect? In this case, the measured treatment effect is going to be what? What is our treatment? Our treatment group is getting T plus delta. That's the reading level at end line. For the control group, it is lambda plus delta, right? This is lambda plus delta. That's their reading level at the end line. So if I compare these guys, what is my treatment? It is the reading level for my treatment, which is t plus lambda, minus reading level of the control, which is lambda plus delta. So when I only look at the end line, this is basically what you had, what people were saying is the selection effect. Yes, Pradeep ji.
Yeah. Here, see, depending on your group of non-participants, so this result of comparison will always be different. So comparison with one group of non-participants could be favorable for Pratham.
Exactly.
And another group of non-participants, again, it could be unfavorable.
Perfect.
So is it so that we will select a number of non-participants, then comparing this variation between your participants and this various group of non-participants?
Exactly, which is why we need to randomize. That's where precisely why we need to randomize. We need to let a coin decide what our comparison group is going to be, instead of us picking what our comparison group is going to be.
And here delta, you are assuming it to remain same.
Exactly.
Because through natural process also there will be some difference. So that you are not factoring into. You are assuming that that part will not make any difference.
Exactly. That's the problem with the third part, which I was trying to get at. What is the problem with the third evaluation? I'll come to that. Pradeep ji, you're 5 steps ahead of me. Let me make sure everyone comes along to where you are. You're already 5 steps ahead, but you're absolutely right. And let's see that, right? So if I just look at the second news piece, does everyone understand? This is what you were talking about, selection, right? The fact that if I only compare participants and non-participants in the end line, what I am conflating my treatment effect is the true treatment effect, but also the selection effect lambda. That's what I am adding to my true treatment effect. Okay, good.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you please explain how this selection participants got divided into two, T and lambda, T and delta?
Right. So what is lambda? Lambda is basically at baseline, right? The difference in reading levels between the treatment and control group. Okay. So just at baseline, there is some difference. Delta is basically what is the change over time. So over time, the assumption here is that both of these groups, by being in school, they learned something, which is delta. Okay. So all I'm saying is that if my comparison or if my metric of whether this program worked or not is going to be comparing these two guys, right? Then what is this? The non-participants here, their reading level is what? Is basically this lambda plus this delta.
I'm asking T and delta. How it is divided? Yeah, T and delta. How it is divided? That particular line is divided into two. Na? I just wanted to know how it is divided.
Great. So what is this? These guys are basically people who participated in the Pratham program, right? The change in their reading level, right? So that is going to be divided basically into two components. One component is basically just the fact that children are in school, they're learning something. That's your delta. That's why this delta is the same as the delta here for the control group, because both these guys are in school, right? Everyone's attending school. So just by being in school, they're learning something, which is delta, right? And then whatever is the leftover is what I'm calling the impact of my program, because the green guys are getting the Read India program, right? Whereas the red guys are not. So whatever over delta, whatever is the effect in reading outcomes is what I'm calling the impact of my, this is what I want to measure. Capital T is my true treatment effect, because that's the impact of the program itself.
Delta is external factors.
Exactly.
Or
which are common to both groups.
Yeah, just learning from the school to everyone. Okay.
Exactly.
Gaurav, I have a question, like two questions in fact.
Okay.
Like, we are assuming lambda is to be positive all the time, right? First question.
Not necessary. Yeah.
Okay. So if the lambda can be 0 or lambda can be negative, so the treatment effect will be varying according to that.
Exactly. Yes.
And why are we assuming delta for both treatment and control group are same?
Excellent. I will ask that question. Just wait for one more slide, and I will answer that exact question. Why do I assume this? This is what Pradeep ji was saying as well, right? That the delta is an assumption that we're making. That delta is the same for both the groups. And we'll see why that assumption is going to be important. Which is what I'm going to show you in this one, which is, the difference in differences that we had, right? So what are we doing by difference in differences? This is the last news piece, right? We were comparing the change in the reading levels for participants and non-participants. This is the third news piece that I showed you, right? And now let's see what is the measured treatment effect here. So what I mean by measured treatment effect, in this case, I'm saying this is the change in the reading levels for the treatment group minus the change in the reading levels for the control group. Okay. So what is the change in the reading levels for the treatment group? T plus delta, right? Great. What is the change in the reading levels for the control group?
Lambda plus delta.
No, change in the reading level.
Delta.
Change in the reading level for the control group is only delta, right?
Yeah.
Is only delta. So therefore, what is my treatment effect? It is the change in the treatment group minus change in the control group. So that's T plus delta minus delta,
T.
which is T, right? So if I have a difference in difference, then I am actually recovering the true treatment effect, capital T. That's my true treatment effect of the program. So I am able to, so one, difference in difference is definitely better than the other two methods so far, because in the other two methods we saw, in one method we were conflating it with the time trend delta. In the other method we were conflating it with the selection effect, which was lambda. In this case we are able to eliminate both of them. Okay, so good, we have made progress, right? But that progress comes at a lot of assumptions, right? And so Pradeep ji, this is what Pradeep ji was trying to get at. What are those assumptions that allow us to get at this T? There are two assumptions. One, lambda does not change over time. So whatever selection effect I observed in the baseline, right, that selection effect doesn't change over time. First assumption. The second assumption, which is more important, is that both the groups, the exogenous or the external factors or external changes over time are exactly the same for both of these groups. If this delta was different, if this was say delta T and if this was delta C, right? Suppose they were not the same. In that case, what would you have? You would have this T, but you would also have a plus the change in the deltas if these were not the same. So the other assumption that we are making here is that the delta is essentially the same across my control and treatment, correct? Which is a strong assumption. Okay, with me? But difference in differences are one of the most common ways that people evaluate policy, right? So there are many cases, for example, like a government will start some policy. Okay, so say suppose like Manrega was started back in 2006, or the Bihar government is doing some policy, or West Bengal government did something. What people will usually say is, let's compare, say for example, I look at, I don't know, like lots of things, but say education only, right? So suppose there were scholarships to girls that the Maharashtra government started, and you want to see the outcome you want to see is whether girls actually started attending school or not. One of the most common ways that people will do this is to compare Maharashtra with say Gujarat or Madhya Pradesh or Karnataka, and to say that, look, like, there are changes in Maharashtra in girls if they attended school, but I want to compare that change to changes in girls attending schools in say the other three neighboring states of Maharashtra. And that's precisely what this will give you, right? That's exactly the same setting here as well. So your control group in my girls scholarship case is going to be the neighboring states. So girls over time, it might just be that enrollment of girls is just going up over time. That's your delta. But the assumption that you're making underneath is that external factors that are driving girls to go into school is the same in these neighboring states as it is in Maharashtra. That's the assumption you're making. And if that is the case, then the scholarship program will be able to give you the treatment effect by a difference in difference. Yes.
Sorry,
Vasavi.
Yeah, hi. I didn't quite get the first assumption, that why do we have to worry about lambda changing between baseline and endline? Like, why will it change?
It could change, right? So it might just happen that over time, people who are selecting, there might be dropouts from the program, for example, right? So it might just be that some people who were attending the program at baseline decided not to attend the program at endline, right? So there might be selection effects that might change over time. Yeah. Sumantra, you had a question?
Yeah, delta T and delta C can be also interacting to each other, right? Like some are, I mean, both of them are in the part of the same school and they look at the other fellows attending the program.
Exactly.
And you might get inspired by them.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. So there could be a lot of things. So that's what I wanted to push you to think about, right? So two things that I think everyone should be on board with so far. One is that this is not a bad way of evaluating policy under these very strong assumptions, right? You're still recovering a treatment effect here, which is correct, but it comes at the cost of making some very stringent assumptions with respect to what happens over time to everyone and how does the selection happen at baseline. Okay. If you make these assumptions, then you are fine in terms of saying the difference in difference method will give you the treatment effect. Okay. Great. How would you run this in a regression? One way of running in a regression is to run a regression like this, right? But if you were to run this in a regression, what would you do? You would have a treatment dummy indicator, which is 0 or 1 on whether you are in the treatment group or the control group. You would have a treatment or a time indicator, or whether this is baseline or whether this is end line. So post means it takes the value 1 if that observation is in the end line. It takes the value 0 if the observation is in the baseline. With me?
Vishnu here, both your treatment and post are dummies?
They are both dummies, exactly. So treatment is a dummy that takes the value 1 if you are in the treatment group, which means you got the read India, 0 if you don't. Okay. Post is a dummy that takes the value 1 if you're in the end line and 0 if you're in the baseline. Okay. And then this is an interaction term between the two. Okay, so this is treatment times post. So it's an interaction term. Okay, so now if you have understood this regression, then can someone tell me, sorry, what is alpha? What is alpha telling you? Alpha is what? Alpha is going to be estimated for the people for whom T is 0. So if I put T is equal to 0, right? If I put post is equal to 0, what is Y equal to? Alpha, right? If T is equal to 0, post is equal to 0, 3 times post will be equal to 0, obviously. So Y is equal to what? Y is equal to alpha plus this epsilon here, right? But basically, therefore, alpha so therefore, what is alpha? Alpha is the average reading level. Suppose we are only doing reading for now. Alpha is the average reading level in the control group in the baseline. Does that make sense? Alpha is the average reading level of the control group because T is equal to 0, which means it's the control group in the baseline because post also has to be equal to 0. Correct? Right? So what is alpha plus beta? Alpha plus beta will be the average reading level for the treatment group at the baseline. Because if it's the treatment group, my T is equal to 1. It's baseline, so post is equal to 0. And 3 times post will be equal to 0. So my average Y is just alpha plus beta.
Excuse me.
So we have alpha, we have beta. So beta is basically what? In our graph earlier, beta is your selection effect. So at baseline, how much does the control and treatment group differ by? That was our selection effect, right? So that's basically given by your beta in this regression. What is gamma? Sorry, what is delta? This guy here. Delta is what?
It is the temporal effect.
Time effect. Time effect.
Time effect, right? Time effect, exactly. Because delta is estimated what? So if I put T is equal to 0, so let's take the control group. T is equal to 0. So both of these guys are out, right? So delta is what? The change over time in the control group, right? This is the change over time in the control group. So delta is what we had earlier called our time effect. Okay. Great. And so the claim that I'm going to make right now is that this gamma is what in our earlier slide, sorry, I just switched off my screen. The claim I'm going to make is that the gamma is what in our previous slide was the impact of our treatment, which is capital T. Okay. And so in 1 minute, how is that true? How did we measure it? We said we are going to take a difference in difference, right? I'm going to look at the change in the control group. I'm going to look at the change in the treatment group. I'm going to take a difference in that change in the treatment minus the change in the control. Okay. Now let's see if with me can everyone work this out. So what is the change in the control group from this regression over time? What is the change in Y in the control group? Everyone agrees? Delta is basically the change, because if I put treatment equals 0,
Alpha plus delta.
So alpha plus delta is the end line of the control. Alpha is the baseline.
Minus.
So the change is delta. Okay. So delta is basically my change in the control group. What's my change in the treatment group? This is slightly harder. But what's my change in the treatment group?
Alpha plus gamma.
Sorry?
Alpha plus gamma.
Alpha plus gamma.
So delta plus gamma. Delta plus gamma.
Ah, thank you. Can you explain that, Swati? How?
In the baseline, it will be alpha plus, like treatment is 1, T is 1. So in the baseline, it is alpha plus beta.
Good.
And in the end line, it is T is also 1 and post is also 1. So exactly. The Y is equal to alpha plus beta plus delta plus gamma.
Perfect.
So the subtraction of the two.
Excellent, right? So just to say that a little slower, Swati is saying in the baseline for the treatment group now, for the baseline, which means post is 0 because this is baseline. So your level is what? Alpha plus beta, that's your reading level on average. In the end line for the treatment group, your T is also equal to 1, post is also equal to 1. So treatment's post is also equal to 1. So the average reading level is alpha plus beta plus delta plus gamma at the end line. So what's the change? The change is basically going to be delta plus gamma, right? And so delta plus gamma is my change in the treatment group. Delta is my change in the control group. So what's the difference? The difference in difference is basically gamma, which is the impact of our treatment. Right? So if I were to run a regression like this, and if you make the assumptions that we were making, that we discussed in the last slide, if you make these assumptions of delta and lambda being the same, under these two conditions, gamma, which is the interaction term, the coefficient in the interaction term, is going to be your treatment effect, basically. Okay? Okay, so now let's move to, after 1 hour, almost 1 hour, 20 minutes, let's move to now why RCTs, right? But now I think the reason I spend so much time on this is I think these are very basic things in terms of like understanding evaluation. If you understand so far what we have done, understanding RCTs is going to be extremely simple. But I wanted to make sure everyone is on board on why we need RCTs and why we want to even bother about randomizing anything. Because there are other ways in which, you know, understanding the pros and cons of other evaluation methods is important to first understand why is it that a new evaluation method can do better over all of this. Okay, so why RCTs? I think because of two things, right? So first thing is that, as we will discuss in a bit, if you randomize things, you can actually causally attribute changes between the treatment and the control group to the experiment itself. And this is getting at what Pradeep ji was saying earlier, which is there is no question about me selecting the control group. I am randomly allocating the treatment, and so I'm letting chance tell me what, or letting probability tell me what the control group is. So literally, like there are what, 68 participants right now. here, 72 participants here, right? So if I actually just toss a coin and I decide who will get, Gaurav's lecture on RCTs and who will not, say, it's a silly example, but suppose I literally flip a coin and decide that, right? And then after 1.5 hours, I do this lecture, and then after 1.5 hours, I compare these two groups. As the econometrician or as the researcher, have I done anything in selecting the treatment or control group? I haven't, right? It's purely chance that has decided who got the lecture and who did not get the lecture, right? And so, as we will see in a bit, that's going to help us overcome all of these effects of selection, of changes, and so on and so forth. This is going to help us get around those effects. The second thing that you can do with RCTs usually involve a lot of intense, rich data collection. So apart from just the treatment effect, you can also learn a lot about the mechanisms. So let's take the Read India program, right? So we saw that at the Read India program, if I were to build an evaluation, you could talk about the fact that, look, reading levels improved, but why did they improve? Is that because the volunteers were good? Is that because the children were more concentrated after school? So there could be lots of things, as there were smaller groups, for example, the class size was much smaller. So there could be lots of things that are driving these increases. So if you have rich data collection that you do, then you can answer some of these questions on the mechanisms of why certain treatment effects can do that the way they are. The third thing is that you can iterate on that. Right. So suppose you find that, let's take like scholarship programs and let's take, I don't know, like free books are two policies that a government is implementing. The question that you can ask as a researcher is, are these two things substitutes or complements? Right. So if I give you both, right, am I helping you even more, or am I actually substituting some of these effects away? So experimentation can help you, and we'll go through some examples today on how we can identify substitutes and complements. As I said, you can unpack some of these impacts, like in the Read India program. Is it the volunteers that worked? Is it so you could run separate experiments, where in some cases you have smaller class sizes, in some cases you have volunteers versus teachers, and so and so. So you can have like a whole bunch of treatment arms to unpack the effect on what is giving you this increase in the reading level. Great. So now let's come to the first part of this, which is when I say causal effect, what am I basically saying? So I'm not going to give you a lot of econometrics just in the interest of time, but the slides, I think Kumar can share the slides later on and you can look at the econometrics of it. So causal identification is the biggest thing why you want to go for RCTs, right? And the reason is because since treatment is assigned completely randomly, right? Before I start the program, there is no reason for me to expect there is a difference between the control and treatment group if I have enough people. So conditional on having enough people, right? Because I'm completely assigning treatment randomly, on average, there should be no effect. There should be no difference, between control and treatment. So let's take the Pratham Read India program, right? Pratham did what? Pratham allowed children to volunteer or select into whether they wanted it or not. So there could be a problem, as was pointed out earlier, that the weaker children are probably going to select themselves. And so the effects might be very different for the weaker children versus the stronger children, right? But suppose I were to randomly allocate people. I go to a classroom, there are 40 children in the classroom, or I go to 2 classrooms, there are 80 children. I say 40 of you get Pratham, and I literally flip a coin. And I say the other 40 don't get the Pratham program. Then there is no part of me as the researcher to select whether it's the weaker kids, whether it's the stronger kids. On average, some of the weak and strong kids will get selected just because it's random. On average, some of the weak and strong kids won't get selected, right? So the idea here is that once you have enough, like what you require is sample. So you require a large enough number of samples to make this claim true on average. If I have 2 people, then, that's not true. But if I have 200 people, then that claim becomes more stronger, right? That on average, there are going to be very little differences between the treatment and the control group. So on average, if I were to run that regression, what you would find is that the selection effect should on average be 0, right? And that's a fact of randomization, okay? And so therefore, the good part of that is that therefore, if I then take the changes, it becomes credible for me to say, like, look, there are weak and strong kids in both groups. Right? So if I compare their changes over time, right, whatever is the control group change, right, that is a good counterfactual. That is a good way to think about how would the treatment group have performed had they not got the treatment? That's what is the counterfactual part of this. And because I've randomized this, that claims become stronger, both in intuition, also econometrically. Econometrically, for people who are academically trained, in your OLS, if you remember, the crucial assumption you need for causal interpretation is that there is what? There is independence between your X and your epsilon. Epsilon and X have to be orthogonal to each other if you want to identify beta hat as the causal effect. Now with randomization, what you're doing is, because I'm tossing a coin and deciding, by construction, the T and the epsilon have to be orthogonal. There's no correlation between them, right? I'm literally tossing a coin. There can't be any correlation between the T and the epsilons, right? So in an econometric specification, therefore, that becomes very powerful. That orthogonality in your Gauss-Markov theorem, I mean, this is like technical econometric stuff, but hopefully I can see some heads nodding. So this is familiar to some people. The Gauss-Markov theorem assumptions require you to have T and epsilon to be orthogonal. If you literally toss a coin, then you're trivially satisfying that assumption. Okay, great. Now there are of course like critiques of this in the sense, and we'll go through, like I also want you to understand the critiques of this as we go through the lecture, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about the critiques as we go towards the end. Megha, but remind me if I don't discuss that, remind me to get back to it.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, so let's jump. I'm going to skip this econometrics in the interest of time, just because I think we've had too much of econometrics, but just to show you that it's there. The slides will be shared with you later on in case you want to go and understand why this selection effect and everything goes away and why we can recover the treatment effects. Okay, great. So I think the key steps while you want to do an RCT, right? There are two things, right? So first is the planning phase, right? So you want to build a super fast train, for example, right? And this is right. This is actually when you start thinking. So you want to think of an idea. You want to say, oh, look, like I want to give girls scholarship. I want to, like, you know, put in some policy that I think is super important for me, right? And then once you actually go to the field, what you find is that, you know, things are quite different in terms of what you expect sitting in an office and thinking what the important questions are. And once you actually implement it, and these are very, very realistic issues to take forward. And I think the discussion that I want to bring out today is also not only understanding how to randomize, but also trying to understand some of the implications that we have in terms of implementing it. And what are the challenges? There might be ethical challenges, like why do you need a control group? How can you not give, if you know, for example, these things are going to work, is it ethical to actually not give it to some people, for example? That is the biggest criticism. What is the learning that can be externally valid, in the sense that suppose Maharashtra gives girls scholarship, is that a good idea for Jharkhand? Or like what someone was saying earlier, like Kerala gives out girls scholarship, right? Is it therefore a good idea for Jharkhand to start doing that? I don't know, right? Because the culture and the setting of Jharkhand might be very different, right? So there might be very, very crucial differences, and I want to bring out a discussion later on towards the end when we talk about, you know, when you conceive a project versus when you actually implement these projects. Okay. Okay. So random selection. So now we're actually coming to randomizations. So random selection, so basically this is a map of Delhi, for example. You are, say, interested in putting in some policy in Delhi, and you're interested in looking at what happens to, say, income, right? So what does random selection mean? Suppose like monthly income per capita across all of these cells on average is, say, 1250, right? What you want to do is, the first part is the selection part of this. I haven't randomized yet, right? You're not doing this across the entire state of Delhi with everyone. So the first part is selection of just your sample, okay? And then the next part is going to be allocating the sample randomly into treatment. So this is basically flipping a coin or writing a stata code. You're randomly assigning people to treatment. That's the red part. So, and then you can see, because it's randomly assigned, on average, you will see something that's very close to your sample average, right? Because I've randomly picked places. And then the rest, what you want to do is to allocate them to control. Okay. What I'm showing you here this is what you want to see, which is that this is what we call balance in an RCT. What I mean by balance is that at baseline, on average, treatment groups and control groups look the same. So income is one outcome, You could look at a lot of other outcomes, right? Whatever you're interested in. This is what we call band. This is telling me statistically, the numbers are obviously different, but statistically they are the same. Statistically, the difference between them is 0. Okay. What is not random, which is something that a lot of people do, but it is incorrect, is that suppose instead of randomly picking, I were to say, let's put North Delhi as treatment and South Delhi as control, right? Why is that wrong? Because you guys are in Delhi. So you understand, right, what the problem is going to be. If I look at income, North Delhi on average has lower income than South Delhi, right? So what is not random is something like this, where North Delhi is assigned to treatment, South Delhi is assigned to control, because then your income differences might be huge. Okay, good. So now let's come to how do you randomize. So there are two ways. I mean, this is very intuitive, so I'm going to move through this faster. There are two ways in which you can randomize. One is a fixed probability, which means every student has a 50% chance of getting to treatment and control. I literally flip a coin, right? The problem with that might be the fact that if I'm literally allocating this, my treatment and control need not be 50-50. On average, they will be once I have large enough samples, but it might just be that there are more people in treatment, there are lesser people in control, or vice versa, because you're flipping a coin, right? So that's a fixed probability randomization. It is still random in the sense I'm still letting a coin decide who gets treatment and control, but the proportion is not fixed. It's not 50-50. The other one is fixed proportion. What I mean by fixed proportion is that I have 100 people and I allocate 50 of them to treatment and 50 of them to control. Therefore, the proportion of people in treatment and control are fixed at 50%. If you think about it more carefully, that means the probability of you being allocated is not 50-50. Why? Because suppose like I am suppose there are 100 people and I am number 99 in that list, right? So if I am number 99, I know exactly if I'm going to go into control or treatment. Why? Because there have been 49 people in control and there have been 50 people in treatment, right? If I'm number 99. So if there are 50 people in treatment, I know for sure I can't be in treatment because it's just proportion. So the probability therefore is not 50-50 of me being allocated to treatment and control, right? But what is random is whether I'm number 99 or whether I'm number 1 on that list. That's random, right? So this is slightly different in terms of the concept behind it, but it's still, you're still letting chance basically decide who gets allocated to control and treatment, right? Okay, so now let's come to some of the questions that you guys were raising, right? So that's just the basics of randomization, how you randomize. Now let's come to what levels do you want to randomize, right? So say for example, this is what we call a unit of randomization, right? So there can be different units of randomization. Let's take the Pratham example. Since we are on education, let's continue with an education example. Suppose like I had the Read India program, right? And this is say a school, what I have right now, right? Now suppose these are like 100 kids in my school. I could literally randomize. What I'm saying right now is at the individual level, in the sense that there are whatever, like 15 classrooms. Each classroom has, so many people. I can randomize children into treatment and control, right? What is the good or the bad thing about this? Any problems with doing this? You see what I'm trying to do? I have Read India. I want to evaluate Read India. That's my policy question. I'm using an RCT. I'm randomizing children into treatment and control. However, I'm randomizing at the individual level. I have 100 children in my school. 50 of them get Read India, 50 of them don't. That's valid. There's nothing wrong in that. Or is there? Bimal?
Yeah, the contamination we cannot control. The treatment group will mix with the control group in the school, so the treatment will be of no use.
Perfect, right? So what Bimal is basically saying is that, imagine I'm in a class, I am one of the guys who did not get Read India, but my partner who's sitting next to me was in the treatment group and he got Read India, right? So then in that case, what am I worried about? What are we comparing? We're comparing the outcome in the control and the outcome in the treatment, right? But if both of us are sitting next to each other, I might just go and ask him, right? I might be like, oh, so like yesterday I heard that you had a really cool class. Like, what did they teach you? And if he tells me all of that, then the treatment group is basically contaminating the control group, right? So therefore, the effect of the treatment that you want to evaluate is no longer valid, because now the control group is also getting the treatment. It is less of an intensity, agreed, but I'm still getting the treatment. Whereas a control group technically should be people who don't get the treatment at all, right? And sometimes it might be interesting because you want to study contamination, right? So say, for example, in some cases, you really want to study so another question you might have is, do children share information? So if I give information to some children, is it true that you share it with your friends? That is something you might actually want to study, in which case you want contamination, right? So you can design it such that you have contamination, okay? So how can we get around this?
We must always have our treatment and the control mutually exclusive to each other.
Exactly. So therefore, can you tell me if this is so if Pratham comes to you and then they ask you, so this is, I was attending Gaurav's lecture and Gaurav said this is a bad idea. You shouldn't be doing this. So then what will be your solution to this? Do you have a solution? Darpajit? Can you suggest
randomization at village level?
Sorry, Anu?
Randomization at village level or something to be more ideal than this?
Excellent.
First we have to stratify, then randomize, I think.
Excellent. Yes. So what you can do is you can increase the slice or increase the level of randomization, right? So instead of individuals being randomized, you can randomize clusters, right? So clusters could be classrooms, right? So as you can see here, entire classroom is either treatment or control, and all the kids either get it or all the kids don't, right? Now your criticism might still stay, saying like people have friends across classrooms, right? And so maybe they talk to each other. Again, that might be a contamination issue. Fine. You can randomize schools, right? So entire schools are either randomized into control or entire schools are randomized into treatment, right? So with every increasing level, there are pros and cons, right? So the pro is what? The advantage is that you're reducing contamination. What is the disadvantage? Is there a disadvantage?
It can still, hi.
Yeah.
It can still happen. When your control and treatment, they are not similar, right? Like there's always a chance if it is happening in two schools, then.
You're on the right track. You're on the right track. What do you need?
It will be homogeneous.
What do you need for this?
Homogeneity in the control end.
Or another way of putting it
So
is that
lambda is positive, and it can be higher.
it can be higher,
Yeah.
true. But suppose I had 1,000 schools, right? And 500 were treatment, 500 were control. On average, I'm willing to believe that kids in those schools might be similar looking. But what do you need? You need 1,000 schools, right? So which means it's much harder to get 1,000 schools than it is to get 1,000 children. Those 1,000 children can be across 2 schools. That's totally fine, right? So the minute you start aggregating to higher levels, the problem is sample size. And sample size matters precisely because of the issues that all of you have pointed out. If I have too few sample, then my selection index I can't say anything about.
There will be some issues regarding cost escalation of the project also.
Exactly, precisely. Cost is another issue. I have to go and survey children across 1,000 schools. That's going to be costly.
Yeah.
Pradeep ji?
Yeah, means to make the randomization effective, means some kind of a priori information has to be there.
Exactly. So there is a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to appreciate that trade-off. That it's not all. So if someone asks you, I want to do Pratham Read India, and then you're like, oh, like individual level is bad because I learned this in Gaurav's class, so let's do schools, right? Don't jump to that conclusion. There are trade-offs. The trade-off is sure, you're reducing contamination, but you're increasing costs. You're increasing the amount of serving that you need to do across 1,000 schools, right? And so that's not trivial at all. If you're, if you want to implement this at scale. Okay, excellent. Now let's come to some of the different methods, right? What are some of the different methods that people commonly use? One is multiple treatments. What do you mean by multiple treatments? Is that I could use, so right now, until now, we've just been discussing a control group and a treatment group. Not necessarily. I can have control group and 2 treatment groups, right? So say, for example, I might want to evaluate or read India in one, and then on the other thing, I might want to evaluate scholarship programs. I want to see whether, remedial classes or volunteers, do they work, or does giving them books and money work, for example, right? So you can have one control, you can have two treatment arms, right? And so that's still fine. You can still, you can still run this randomization. Factorial designs, or this is extremely common. What do you mean by factorial designs? What you mean is that suppose there are 2 treatment arms I want to run. Suppose this is with, say, like your vocational training courses, right? So what I want to do is I want to evaluate whether, suppose I want to start a firm, I want to be an entrepreneur, right? There are 2 things I need. 1, money, second, knowledge. For example, as a government, suppose you identify these as 2 major roadblocks, that either people don't have the capital to start their firm or people don't have the expertise. And suppose I start 2 things. I want to understand whether, knowledge or vocational training, can they help people start firms? Second, can loans help people be more successful entrepreneurs, right? A cross-cutting design is basically what you do is you allocate randomly people into one of 4 groups as follows. Either some people get the training or they don't. Okay, that's one. And what you want to do is you want to cross-cut it with whether people get a loan or not. So this is slightly different than what we've been doing until now, because now you're going to have 4 groups of people, as you can see. There are going to be people who only get cash grants but don't get training. There are going to be people who only get the training but don't get a loan, right? There are going to be people who get neither of them. There are going to be people who get both of them. With me? Right? Now, what is the advantage of doing this? The advantage of doing this is, suppose I compare people who get nothing to people who get only the cash grant. I can say something about whether loans work or not, correct? If I compare people who get nothing to people who get only training, I can say whether training works or not, right? This group is very important because this groups get both of them. So this is why, so here I can ask the question, is giving a cash grant as well as giving loans, are they complementing each other? So are they increasing the chances of you being a successful entrepreneur, or are they substituting each other? So is the treatment effect higher if I give you both as compared to giving you either, as compared to giving you none? Okay. So factorial designs are useful to help you understand some of these questions. Okay. Now, so this is how you would basically allocate this, right? So the interaction effect, as Pratiksha says, is basically what you can get with this, right? The interaction effect. So as you can see here, some people are getting both, some people are getting one, some people are getting none, right? So you have this sample and you can compare these different groups. The third thing in which, the third design or the third way in which you can run randomized trials is essentially you can change some of these things. You can change dosage, sensitivity, elasticity, spillovers. What do I mean by all of these words? So for example, sometimes you want to see whether the dosage or the sensitivity. So economists are always interested in price elasticities, right? So say for example, like in Africa, they tried this experiment where they basically showed that, look, like if I give you bed nets for free, right? If the price of the bed net is very, very low, bed nets, malaria is a huge problem in Africa. And so therefore, one of the policies that the government was interested in, let's give people bed nets, right? And so the question, of course, was that, sure, like first experiment you can run to show that bed nets work. They actually help reduce malaria, but that's not surprising, right? What is actually a more policy relevant question is whether I should give them for free or whether I should price them at some price instead of giving it literally for free. So if that's your question, then the thing you want to do is you want to randomize price, right? So some people get it for free, right? Some people get it at a discounted price. Some people get it at full price, right? And what you want to see is how steep is your demand curve. This is your demand curve basically, right? I'm offering you different prices and I'm seeing what is the take up, how many people take up a bed or how many people buy a bed net. So suppose I just take this line here. What this is saying is, for example, if you give it for free, everybody buys a bed net. Obviously it's free, everyone gets it, right? But the minute you start charging any money for it, there's a sharp fall in demand, right? And that's important from a policy perspective if the government wants to do this, right? And similarly, as you can see, there are other things like deworming, for example. So deworming, what you do is you basically charge a little bit for that deworming pill, and you see take up goes from like 75% to less than 20%. That's important because the government, if it can afford to give things for free, that's fine. But if it cannot, then this is an important policy question to answer, right? So RCTs can help you not only, so the first step is to show that deworming works, but then if I want to implement that at scale as a government, then I want to price it. And so RCTs can also help you understand how to price it, right? Great. So in the last, I mean, I can go over by 5 minutes, but because this is, I think, an important issue with RCTs, which is, ethical issues. Like, so now let's come to like design issues. Like, so what are the things that, will come up as problems and how do you want to solve those problems, right? So one of the things could be, design issues. So here is an example from the New York Times, which basically said that, look, as you can read here, there was a program that tried to see whether, homeless people, if giving them affordable housing, does that work or not, right? If people are out on the streets and you want to help them. And so if you are, you want to run an experiment, basically you want to do what? You want to take 50 homeless people and give them some assistance, and the other 50, you don't want to give them any assistance. You can see the ethical issues in this, right? You're helping out some homeless people, but you're denying aid or assistance to other homeless people, right? And this can be true in medicine. In medicine, you hear this all the time, right? So like, if I can afford, if there's a medicine I know that works, why should some people get it and why should some people not get it, right? And so these were some of the criticisms that were brought out, which is right? These are things you should worry about. That's all I'm trying to say, right? When you design these experiments, but there can be some defenses to this, right? So say, for example, this is the stuff that people were discussing earlier, right? Sometimes you just don't have the money to give everybody assistance. The government doesn't have an infinite budget, right? Your budget is pretty limited. And so it might be the case that, in some cases, you just have excess supply of people who want assistance. And so in that case, you can decide who you want to give that, but you're deciding it completely randomly so that it helps you evaluate the impact of such programs, right? The other thing is, again, the same thing which we had talked about, which is we talked about contamination or spillovers, right? So then in that case, some challenges that you can face is how do you even identify. I remember we were running this program in Punjab where, we were giving them, we were trying to evaluate basically some health interventions and trying to see whether, and Punjab has first world problems in like diabetes and hypertension and all of these problems. So we were trying to see whether, these problems can be reduced. The problem was the way we were allocating treatment was by name. Now, if you have been to Punjab, you will realize that Gurvinder Singhs and, Parvinder Kaurs are 50 people, right? So they have the same name. And so one problem that you can just identify is how do you even identify who is a Parvinder Kaur who's been treated and Parvinder Kaur in the control, right? So these are practical challenges that you come across, right? So, sometimes you can have these problems as a service provider, you might not be able to identify them, right? So what can you do? What can you do? Well, what we tried to do essentially was you can assign them to separate service providers. So we had 2 camps. One camp, all the Parvinder Kaurs, they all got a chit which said you're in camp number 1 or camp number 2. And so what we did was to basically put them to separate service providers. So instead of randomizing at the individual level, you can randomize at the service provider level. Okay, that can help you get around these things. Okay, what are some other, so that's basically it. What are some other problems that you do? The other thing that you might think about is the control group finds out about the treatment. This is your Pratham Read India case, right? So my friend suddenly comes and tells me, oh, I attended this really cool class yesterday. And I was like, why didn't I get it, right? So there might be issues there. This we have already discussed, so I won't like spend a lot of time here. If you talk to friends, so on and so forth, one thing, the simple thing is what? The simple thing is you want to, just randomize at the school level or something. Here is something that's even, is similar, right? Suppose I don't get the treatment, but let's take toilets, right? So in some cases, toilets were constructed, some cases toilets were not constructed, for example, right? Some people, you want to reduce open defecation. That's what you're interested in as the health ministry. So you decide, okay, I'm going to subsidize toilet construction for some people, and some people actually don't build toilets. However, what happens? In the baseline, everyone was open defecating. Now, the treatment group got toilets, control group did not. But now the control group observe the treatment group, right, who are using toilets. And so that might result in behavioral change in the control group. So what do you observe between baseline and end line? If I just compare baseline and end line, there is no effect, right? No treatment effect, because everybody was open defecating at baseline. Everybody is using a toilet at end line, right? So you're conflating what? You're conflating a different type of contamination, which is just observing the treatment group and changing your behavior, even though you did not get the treatment yourself, right? So these are all threats to randomization, right? That one needs to think about as we go along. Now, in the interest of time, let me just give you, this was, I think, because Darpajit is, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but this was what this is basically what you had in mind, right? So suppose this is a phase-in design. I don't have the money to give everyone laptops, but I want to see whether technology helps or laptops help or not, right? You don't have the resources. What you can do is you can use what we call a phase-in design, which means what? I take 1 year. In 1 year, I take 1/3 or 1/4 of my sample and they get laptops. Suppose every year I only have 1 crore rupees to give everybody laptops, suppose, or 10 lakhs, or whatever is your budget. I only have that much amount. So let me pick randomly people who get the laptops and not. So in phase 1, 1/4 of you get it. Second year, again 1/4 of you get it. Third year, again 1/4 of you get it. And by year 4, everybody gets it, right? And so therefore, but you can still evaluate it, right? Because in every year, these 1/4 people have the other 3/4 as your control group, right? These guys have you as your control group. Your control group is shrinking over time, right? Over time, your control group is becoming smaller and smaller, but you always have a control group. And after year 4, you don't have a control group. Awesome. Last example I'll give you and then I'll stop. If there is this is another problem which happens very, very frequently, especially if you're working in policy, right? So usually there will be some eligibility cutoff. So say BPL, Aadhaar cards, or you want to give them some assistance, and the way you identify them is on income, right? Now, obviously, if people are eligible, these are really poor people, right? Just because you want to prove a point on evaluating the impact of the program, you don't really want to affect their eligibility. They're really people who need assistance, right? But at the same time, I want to evaluate the program. I want to do both of these things, right? So is there a way in which you can do it? There is a midway in which you can do it. What you can do is the following. In the ineligible group, right, people who are very close to this original cutoff, I can randomly put in some people, even though they're not eligible, I can randomize within this bubble, essentially, right? So these are not very rich people, but they are not also very poor people. So the trade-off here is the following. The trade-off here is, I don't want to use people who are eligible. They're really poor people who need it. These are really rich people. They're not anyway in need of this policy, right? What I can do is I can find this like the Goldilocks problem, right? I can find people who are just right? And I can evaluate my policy for those people. Of course, the trade-off is, if you find some treatment effect here for these guys, there is very limited things you can say about a person who's really poor. Would the treatment have a same effect for people who are really poor? You can't say that, right? Because you haven't randomized or you haven't evaluated the program for really poor people, right? So, but what I wanted to get out from today's lecture is essentially trying to first build out the basics on, if you run these simple regressions, what are the problems that you face? Why are they not good metrics for evaluation? Or what are the assumptions that you need if you want to evaluate them? Second is to build a structure for RCTs. We have obviously in a 1 hour, 1.5 hour lecture, I can't go through the details of RCTs, but hopefully this gives you a flavor of the different types of RCTs and the challenges that you can face.